muy buenas tardes a todas, a todos, a todes. Estoy muy contenta de tenerlos aquí en nuestra primera charla con Café de este año académico. Veo muchas caras nuevas, nombres nuevos y nombres que también reconozco de antes. Entonces espero que estas charlas sean muy visitadas todo el semestre. Estamos empezando en línea, pero vamos a tener algunas que van a ser en persona y en línea también. Entonces, la próxima creo que va a ser en persona, pero también va a estar en línea por Zoom. Bueno, hoy solamente quiero darles la bienvenida. Tenemos unas charlas súper interesantes. Andrea Bennett va a poner un link, un enlace. Ay, estoy hablando en español. Should I be speaking in English? Or in Spanish? Okay, I should be speaking in English. I'm sorry. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marcela Vázquez León. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American Studies. Very glad to see a lot of people here, some old faces and some new ones, old names as well. This is our first charla of the series, and I hope a lot of you are going to continue coming throughout the semester and the academic year every Friday. We are starting with an online charla, but we are going to do some of them in person and also online. So they're going to be hybrid. I think the next one is hybrid. We have interpretation today. Tenemos un intérprete. Hoy en día debería empezar por eso. Si necesitan interpretación de español al inglés, wait, sí. Por favor, váyanse al... abajo pueden ver un signo del mundo que dice interpretación, se pueden entrar ahí. Y tenemos a nuestro intérprete Ron Zellen, que les va a interpretar de español al inglés. So we have interpretation, English, Spanish, and then we're going to do for those who, we're going to have a speaker who will do it in Spanish, in English, and then we're going to have translation, written translation to Spanish. Am I being confusing here? I don't know. So Andrea Bennett, who is helping us organize here. Thank you, Andrea. She's going to be putting a link to our upcoming events, our upcoming charlas. So welcome everyone, and I'm going to leave the floor to Dr. Liz Oglesby, who is introducing our first speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Marcela. Thanks everyone for participating in this talk. I want to welcome especially, I know that there are members from different humanitarian organizations that work on the border and work with migrants here in Southern Arizona. So I want to extend a special welcome to you. Bienvenidas, bienvenidos, gracias por participar. Quiero extender un bienvenido muy especial a la gente de la comunidad del sur de Arizona que trabaja en temas de la frontera y con migrantes. Gracias por estar con nosotros. I'm going to introduce the two speakers, and so I will do it bilingually as I can. And also just to reiterate for those who are coming in, we do have interpretation from Spanish to English. And so you can click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen, go into the English area. And when our Eriberto will speak, you will be able to get your translation. Okay, so let me please start by introducing the speakers. Voy a comenzar con nuestros invitados. Tenemos a Cathleen Caron, que es la directora ejecutiva de la organización Justicia en Moción, que es una red de 40 organizaciones en México y Centroamérica. Cathleen Caron is the executive director of Justice in Motion, which is a network of 40 organizations in Mexico and Central America, which works to defend migrant rights transnationally. Justicia en Moción trabaja en defensa de los derechos de los migrantes, organizando a través de las fronteras, y están trabajando en el tema de los niños que fueron separados de sus papás y de sus familias en la frontera. También trabajan en promoción de políticas para defender a los derechos de los trabajadores migrantes. Cathleen Caron has also worked as a lawyer with the Migrant Farm Workers Justice Project in Florida, working on issues of defending the rights of temporary migrant farm workers. Cathleen también ha trabajado como abogado con el proyecto de justicia para los trabajadores agrícolas migrantes en el estado de Florida en defensa de sus derechos como trabajadores migrantes. Eriberto Pop Cán is a Maya Quechua legal advisor to the Guatemalan Association of Mayan Lawyers and Notaries, specializing in strategic litigation in matters of land, territory, natural resources, and indigenous peoples. He has supported separated families in the northern region of Guatemala through the Justice in Motion program since August 2018. Eriberto Pop Cán es un asesor legal maya quechí con la Asociación Guatemalteca de Abogados y Notarios Mayas, que se especializa en litigio estratégico en temas de tierra, territorio, recursos naturales y pueblos indígenas. Ha estado apoyando a las familias separadas en la región norte de Guatemala a través del programa Justicia en Moción desde agosto del 2018. First Cathleen, I believe first Cathleen will speak for about 20 minutes, then Eriberto will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we have an open floor for discussion. So thank you very much, Cathleen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Oglesby, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with people that are directly involved at the border. It must be so painful for you all to hear Washington talk about your land being very disconnected. So it's really exciting to have so many of you to talk directly about our work. So I feel very honored to be invited here to speak today. So as the doctor said, I'm going to start for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to pass it off to Eriberto, who's going to talk also for about 20 minutes, and then happy to field whatever questions that you're all interested in. So quickly, a roadmap. I'm going to talk about why I founded the organization, kind of what are the issues we're addressing, the evolution of the work, and then talk about how we got involved in family reunification, the zero tolerance policy, and kind of the details of that work and where that is now. And I will try to time myself, see if I can stay within 20 minutes, and I'll certainly stop if I'm going too long. I founded Justice in Motion almost 20 years ago to ensure that migrants can access justice across borders, what we now call portable justice. We work in North and Central America to ensure that wherever migrants go, their rights follow them in the labor, protection, and civil rights contexts. But before I get into all of those details, I want to talk about kind of the journey of why I set up the organization as such. Appropriately for this crowd, from what I understand from the doctor, it all started in Guatemala. Soon after I graduated from college, I went to Guatemala and lived there from 1994 to 1997. I was working there as a volunteer at first, and then moving into paid jobs at institutions that probably many of you know, the Archbishop's Human Rights Office, then CALDH, and finally Managua, the UN mission that oversaw the end of the civil war there. I returned to the United States to attend law school. As a new lawyer, I moved to Florida to represent mostly undocumented Guatemalan tomato pickers seeking to recover wages stolen by their employers. But I also collaborated in cases for Guatemalan workers on temporary H-2B visas who were in the United States for short periods of time planting pine trees. What was quickly evident to me as I was doing this work in Florida was that the workers did not always stay in the United States for the entirety of a lawsuit, which can often take many, many years. They went home due to a visa ending, a sick relative, deportation, or just finished with the United States. That migration was not just a one-way path. What was also equally clear is our way of lawyering did not effectively accommodate the reality of migrants. Organizations like ours, like the Migrant Farm Worker Justice Project that Dr. Oglesby mentioned, we would have to drop clients. I did it personally, who left the country because it was so difficult to continue representing them in US courts when they were no longer there. Some of the organizations, including where I worked as well, made heroic, really big efforts to keep those workers in the cases, but they were exclusively unilateral efforts. They would spend enormous resources flying down to Mexico, Central America to work directly with migrants themselves. But what was missing with this conversation and this cross-border legal work were our counterparts. Where were the human rights lawyers that I had worked for when I was living in Guatemala during that time? They were not part of these conversations. They were not part of this legal defense. Though these cases were, successful, these individual cases, I knew that the impact would be significantly increased with long-term implications if we were working more effectively, working at all with our counterparts like Eriberto, who you're going to hear from, in a more sustained effort to deal with transnational challenges in a transnational way. So that's why I founded the organization, is to do just that, to build a network to ensure justice across borders, portable justice, so that migrants returned to their country of origin by force or choice no longer had to give up their rights if they suffered labor exploitation. And the core of the model is the Defender Network. So the Defender Network exists of organizations that already exist in the field. So we are not opening offices, we're not sending employees down to Mexico or Central America. It is organizations that already are there, are already part of the communities in high sending migrant areas that have legal capacity. So there are people like Eriberto, who you're going to hear from small town lawyers to pastoras sociales, to church pastoral agencies, to women's labor rights organizations, to land rights defense, indigenous organizations. Very diverse group of defenders. What we are now over 46 human rights organizations and small town human rights lawyers that comprise this network in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, in those 5 countries. What we do with the network is we do cases, individual cases, initially just around labor rights. So we have created a very cultivated, careful, complex system to match US lawyers who call us when they have a case, a labor exploitation case for a worker who has left the country. We match them with the defender in one of those, in where the Defender Network is, and kind of facilitate that need. So what could it be? For example, it could be to help set up remote testimony, a video testimony, so that someone that has returned to Nicaragua can testify in a labor exploitation case that's filed in US courts. It could be locating missing clients that, after lawsuits take many, many years, and sometimes you lose contact with the workers that you're representing, to go out and to find them. It could be, 10 years later and they finally win a lawsuit, but they no longer know where any of the workers are to give the money, right? To reconnect the US lawyers with their clients. And it's also about translating a complicated legal system in a way that, if you can imagine, someone who's returned to Mexico or Central America has little understanding of. Why would they? It's not their legal system. They're completely far away from it, and perhaps barely even know the US lawyer representing them. So the defenders also are this bridge, this cultural legal bridge of the case that's happening in the United States. The casework informs the policy work, which is another part of the work we do here at Justice in Motion. So how we add value is really pulling from the defender's expertise and seeing how these cases are playing out and what the impacts are of workers who return to their home country, either after they return or before they go. We do a lot of work around temporary foreign worker visas, H-2A, which is agriculture, H-2B, non-agriculture. So recruitment happens not in the US. Recruitment is happening in the countries of origin. So there's a lot of policy work around that to improve protections, both through the US regulatory scheme, but also in the countries of origin, who all have laws that talk about what happens to workers during the recruitment process. Happy to go in the Q&A a lot more into the current opportunities under Biden, who's putting a lot of attention into H-2 visas in the Northern Central America countries right now. We also do trainings. So we do trainings for defenders in US laws and our US judicial system. You know, we have common law, they have civil law. It's a whole different legal structure. We train US lawyers on how to represent clients who are not here anymore. Don't give up on those cases. Those are the hardest cases. Don't give up on those cases. How do you do it? What are the tricks? What are the defendants going to do to get you out of court because your client's no longer is local? And defenders also offer trainings to US lawyers to educate US lawyers on their systems, give them context to their clients, help them better represent their clients in these cases that can drag on for years and years. Right now, as I said, we're in 5 countries with 45 members, and we are mid-Mexico through Nicaragua. And over the next 2 years, we're going to expand the network north to closer where you all are, north to the border. So we'll be looking for organizations to team up with that have legal capacity that want to join our network so we can expand the work we do. So how does a labor rights organization that's doing cross-border work get involved in family separation? So the story also starts with children. In 2014, lots of unaccompanied minors started coming up from Central America, as probably many of people on this call are very aware of, and probably know a lot more than I do about the topic. So what happened is we started getting calls from US lawyers who were trying to help protect these kids through the immigration process to avail them of immigration relief, which is called special immigrant juvenile status. So children who are abused, neglected, and abandoned can get this special immigration relief. The challenge is they have a portable justice challenge. They have to find a parent in the country of origin to tell them that the guardianship is going to change from them to someone else in the United States, which is a first step toward moving toward the immigration relief. So this was really hard for US lawyers to suddenly, how am I going to find this father in Honduras? How am I going to find this mother in Coban? How am I going to find this person? So we started getting tons of phone calls from US lawyers saying, can you help us serve process on these parents in the countries of origin so these children can get a shot at staying in the United States. So we started working on these cases, and this quickly led to a lot of soul searching about, are we really about labor rights across borders for migrants? Or is it really about justice across borders for migrants? So we actually embraced this reflected demand from the US side to help these children. And we actually were Global Workers Justice Alliance, was our original name when I founded the organization, Global Workers Justice Alliance. And we changed our name in 2016 to Justice in Motion to embrace this broader mission. So then we started working on all sorts of immigration protection cases, asylum, SIJ, U visa, T visa. And what that is the collecting the evidence in the countries of origin to help to beef up their cases so that they can secure the protection in the United States, because some missing pieces of evidence could mean you're not going to get the protection you need. Because as you all know, when people leave, they're not organizing their asylum claim and have all the paperwork they need to show a judge in the United States why they had to go running and seek safety in the United States. So that's where the Defender Network can come in to collect all that evidence to ensure safety. We also work on civil rights cases. So we knew it was very timely with the 2016 election, realizing that there was going to be an increase in arrest, detention, and removal of immigrants. So the civil rights expansion was also timely. And how we expanded into family separation was a call from the ACLU. So the ACLU called us on in early 2018, saying that there is, with the zero tolerance policy, as you all know very well, separating children from parents, from legal guardians, as opposed to the regular separations that continues to happen, of course, from the non-legal guardians, grandparents, older brother, tia, etc. But parents was different, and prosecuting parents, therefore justifying removing children and separating the families. So he thought that some of them were getting deported. and wanted to see, for us to find some of these families to see what the situation was. So some of the defenders tracked down some families. And then because of that, deported families, all in the end of the day, 5,000 families were separated and 1,000 of them were deported. So because of the work, deported families were included in the ACLU's Miss L versus ICE lawsuit, which is one that got the injunction to stop the policy in June 2018. So as you probably remember, the government, the judge ordered the government to reunify the families with a short timeline. The government failed spectacularly because they had no plan or intention of ever bringing these families back together. And if you read the Caitlin Dickerson article that came out in the Atlantic last month, it is excellent. It goes really in the weeds in the Trump White House of how the policy was formed. So shedding some light on how this was going on for so long with the well before any of us knew about it, or maybe you all did at the border, but El Paso is where it kind of started. Anyway, so the steering committee was formed because a judge said the government is not finding these kids. We're going to turn it over to civil society. So a steering committee was formed. Justice Emotion was part of it. Kind, Paul Weiss Law Firm, and Women's Refugee Commission all came together to find the 1,000 deported families and to figure out where their children were. So we had already been working on a cross-border justice model for over a decade at this point. I founded the organization in 2005, and this was 2018. So we had really thought about how to do this, and the Defender Network was already there, already resources that already exist in the field doing their own work. So to mobilize the Defender Network to work on this issue was right there. And it was a really good moment for us to show that the defenders were invaluable for this transnational tragedy. So some of the initial reactions were to, let's hire US investigators and send them south of the border to find the parents. And that was just kind of akin to what I had been used to when I started in the farm worker community. Is it's important to do that and you will get some success, but it is much better to work with the Eribertos of the world, as you will hear when he talks to you in a couple minutes. And they're already there working with these communities. And so it was our chance to really move up onto a national stage to show the value of transnational collaboration, like why it's more impactful and longer term to work with advocates in the countries of origin as well on these really hard issues. So that's what we did. The 20 different defenders since 2018 have worked on various aspects of this. At first it was searching and finding the parents, and Eriberto's going to give you some stories of how hard those searches were and what it was like to find a parent. What also at the time, there were very few options for the parents for reunification. It was two bad options. Option one was to have your child returned to the situation that you had originally fled. And the other was to have your child remain in the United States, which could mean permanent separation. Those were the only options, with a very small exception during the Trump years, the Trump era. The small exception was if your civil rights were violated at the border in the process of asking for asylum, the judge did allow some families to come back up. I think 50 families in the end returned during the administration through the court to be reunited in the United States. So also civil rights cases were filed. In the end of the day, about 900 civil rights cases were filed, Federal Tort Claims Act initially. We also played a role, the defenders did, in seeing who wanted to participate in that. Does justice mean that would be for monetary damages for the suffering of the actual separation? So you had the reunification options, which were not good options at the time under the administration. There were the possible civil rights lawsuits, which we had to find attorneys in the United States. And it was not as easy as you would expect it to be to find lawyers that were willing to take cases for clients who were not in the United States. And then that's how it was pretty much for the whole Trump administration. So I see about 4 minutes left, so I should end on time. So when Biden came to power, everything changed entirely. He made it a campaign promise that he was going to do something for these families. And so that gave us leverage to hold him to his campaign process to actually promised to actually do something for these families that weren't just what the court was doing, because obviously the government can do much more than what a court can do, limited to a lawsuit and limited to a certain universe. So Biden formed the Family Reunification Task Force, if you all recall, and appointed Michelle Bernay from the Women's Refugee Commission to head up the task force, which was great because Women's Refugee Commission and Michelle was part of the steering committee. So very much an insider of knowing how this process working. So what we've done now is help the families avail themselves of returning to the United States to be reunified in the United States with their separated child. They've expanded who's allowed to return. So it's not just the separated parents, but it can be other accompanying family members. So it's widened who's allowed to return. Once there was political will for Biden to have people come back under humanitarian parole to be reunited with their kids, we were helping that process until IOM, International Organization of Migration, got the contract with the government to be able to scale up the return. So we were kind of the stopgap measure to help accompany the families to return in collaboration with other organizations, of course, like our piece is really the country of origin, and 80% Guatemala, 80% roughly the separated families were from Guatemala, and many, many indigenous speaking families. So the bulk of the work continues to be in Guatemala. So we are now continuing to provide accompaniment for those families, to search for the families. We call them researches, because after so many years, they need to be told about what the opportunities are under Biden to return if they choose. And they have to be registered in a portal, and the defenders are helping with all of that when needed. And then as well, we're looking, there's many more things that are kind of still pending out there and unresolved. One is when the families come back, humanitarian parole is for 3 years. So they are not given automatic immigration status or based on the fact that they were harmed at the border. What unfortunately, it's really focused on why they came. So their protection will be seeking asylum, and many of these families at the end of the day will not be able to qualify for asylum under the US asylum law and will face deportation and separation again. So we would like to switch the narrative to say we owe it to them because the harm suffered. It's not why they came, it's that you harmed them terribly. One of the worst immigration crimes, absolutely, in my lifetime that's happened in immigration. So we owe it to them to give them the status, because what they're suffering now is because of us. It's not because of why they left the country of origin. This additional harm came from the US government, and therefore we owe it to them to have status, to have damages, monetary reward for what they suffered in a global settlement, not just for the few that have found lawyers to represent them in civil rights cases. So I'm kind of up on time, so I'm going to stop. There's a lot more to talk about, kind of like what is pending, which we can do in the Q&A if there's like what are the outstanding issues and what is kind of currently happening right now with the negotiations with Biden. But I'm going to stop it there and pass it over to Eriberto. ¿Estás listo? So I'm going to pass it over to Eriberto, who's going to get into a lot of the details of what it's like to do this work in Guatemala and directly dealing with the families. So. Thank you very much. Look forward to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Just to remind everybody that if you would like interpretation in English, please just go press the interpretation icon and go into the English room. Thank you. Dele, Eriberto.
Buenas tardes. Gusto saludarlos. Para mí es un honor compartir este momento con ustedes. Como bien lo indujeron, que yo soy guatemalteco, soy maya quechí, soy miembro de la Asociación de Abogados y Notarios Mayas de Guatemala, una entidad compuesto por profesionales, la mayoría maya, de todo el país de Guatemala. La entidad se funda en el 2010 con otras visiones. El tema principal de nuestra entidad en Guatemala es litigio sobre derechos colectivos a favor de pueblos indígenas. Sí, hemos acompañado varios procesos a favor de comunidades y pueblos indígenas que luchan sobre defensas de sus derechos en cuanto al agua, en cuanto al tema agrario, en cuanto acceso a justicia. A partir de ahí, pues nos empezamos a encaminar, que después, pues en el año 2018, un poquito antes, se hizo la conexión con la entidad Justice in Motion, y que nos da un placer estar con ellos y siendo parte de ellos. Y también ya en ese año, pues soy miembro de la red de defensores de migrantes. Quiero decirles de que la migración en nuestro país no es hasta ahora, eso ha venido de memorias ya años, ¿verdad? Pero hemos visto cómo va aumentando esto. Suele traerles un poco de contexto que en Guatemala se estaba dando la migración más en el lado occidente, en San Marcos, en Huehuetenango, casi no en la región donde yo me ubico ahora, es en la región norte de Guatemala, en Alta Verapaz, en la región Quechí, no se daba mucho, pero ya en el año 2016-2017 se empieza a aumentar este factor en todas las comunidades Quechí de Guatemala. Es ahí es que nosotros nos sumamos a esta labor, ayudando a las familias, y nuestro rol como defensores de la red. Primero, de mi parte, yo soy Maya Kikchi. Mi rol ha sido interpretación a muchas de las familias. Ha sido interpretar a familias que han migrado, que han sido detenidos y en los centros de detención. Entonces es ayudarlos a una interpretación de documentos en línea al idioma maya, porque la mayoría de los hermanas y hermanos que migran la mayoría no hablan el castellano. Enseguida, pues también uno de los roles que jugamos dentro de esta red es documentar, es investigar todas estas acciones que se están dando en contra de las familias. Primero, como entidad, nosotros empezamos a determinar la escala del problema que se estaba dando en cuanto a la migración. Ya determinado todo eso, entonces ya nosotros sumamos nuestro apoyo para estas familias, y nosotros hacemos las búsquedas. En mi caso, yo he recorrido medio país, podría decirles. Es lo que hacía mención Cathleen, que la red se dedica a investigar, a documentar, y también a hacer campañas a nivel comunitario, de que hay entidades, hay profesionales organizados que están apoyando a familias que están siendo deportados, que están siendo separados en los distintos fronteras. Entonces nosotros documentamos, investigamos historias de las familias, pero para poder llegar hasta ese punto en las comunidades, nos ha costado un montón, porque el asunto de saber, como decía Cathleen, se sabía de 5,000 de deportados, y de cuántos son guatemaltecos, y de ahí cuántos son indígenas y dónde están ubicados, ¿verdad? Muchos de los casos que recibimos nosotros es que solo nos dan, sabemos que hay padres deportados, sabemos que hay separación de padres e hijos en los centros de detención, pero muchos, por miedo o por algunas otras cuestiones, los padres no entregan sus documentos o no andan con sus documentos. Entonces suele pasar que en muchos de los casos ellos solo entregan un nombre, un apellido. Entonces, nuestro rol como defensor, hacer esa investigación, ¿verdad? ¿De dónde está esa familia? recibimos nosotros los nombres, pero muchas veces de esos nombres no vienen completos. El gobierno facilita los datos generales que recibieron y nosotros pues tenemos que hacer la investigación de gabinete primero para poder encontrar más o menos en qué regiones del país está más o menos esta familia. Ya haciendo ese trabajo de gabinete nos encaminamos a hacer las búsquedas de campo. Y las búsquedas de campo es tan complicado porque las diferentes comunidades, no es que llegues en una comunidad porque hay comunidades que tenemos que recorrer hasta 22 horas para ubicar a una familia. Sí, hay comunidades donde tenemos que ir a encontrar a una familia, no hay carretera. Hay comunidades que están organizadas y primero a nosotros por, digamos, quiénes somos, qué es lo que estamos haciendo con todas esas familias, ¿verdad? Entonces nosotros como defensores en Guatemala, nuestro rol es ubicar a las familias y después de encontrarlos, platicar con la familia, generar confianza, nosotros ya les ofrecemos el servicio de reunificación, acompañarlos en un proceso y pues nosotros hasta la fecha de hoy pues seguimos haciendo ese trabajo, pero nos ha costado un montón porque aquí en Guatemala tampoco, digamos, en las entidades donde tenemos que hacer las investigaciones en cuanto a los nombres de las familias que nosotros hemos necesitado ubicar, en muchos de los espacios públicos tampoco son tan accesibles, ¿verdad? Entonces que también eso ha dado dificultades que nosotros logremos ubicar a las familias. Uno de los factores también que hace que la ubicación y la reunificación de las familias se dé pronta es el lenguaje. El lenguaje, muchos de los hermanos y hermanas que están saliendo de nuestro país no hablan el castellano, la mayoría son indígenas, hablan maya quiché, hablan quechí, hablan pocomchí, hablan mam, y eso ha sido uno de los factores que ha implicado que nosotros nos unamos como red en Guatemala, y pues ahora les puedo decir que estamos haciendo el trabajo con todo el equipo del Justice in Motion en todo el territorio guatemalteco. A nosotros lo que nos interesa es encontrar a la familia, escuchar su historia, documentar su historia. Ya de ahí es lo que hacía mención Cathleen, es canalizar el caso, es hacer las conexiones con abogados que podrían ya representarlos para ver las posibilidades a su favor. Pero todo dentro de las historias escuchadas en muchas de las familias, puedo hacer mención de dos. Tuve casos, por ejemplo, un caso de una niña que se fue con su papá, pero al momento de llegar en la frontera, que fue detenido, la historia es tan dura. La historia es que este padre lo deportaron 6 meses después de ser detenido. Y la niña estuvo detenido 9 meses en un centro de detención que le llaman casa hogar. El papá regresó en la aldea sin su niña y sin saber a dónde acudir después de haber llegado a Guatemala, sin saber dónde ir a preguntar qué va a hacer con su niña. Él llega en su aldea, la esposa le pregunta y mi hija y nuestra hija, en llanto sin responder, a la esposa en silencio posterior le da una respuesta que no sé dónde está. Semanas después ellos se organizan para ver dónde han ido en la ciudad de Guatemala, han ido en los departamentos a preguntar dónde podrían tener algún apoyo para encontrar a su niño. No encontraron apoyo. Hasta que supimos del caso, nos ofrecimos para apoyarlos. Es así que logramos de que los padres empezaran a tener contactos, vías telefónicas con su hija. Después de pasar 6 meses en detenido el señor, un mes después de estar en Guatemala, quiere decir 7 meses después, él empieza a tener contacto con su hija y con la trabajadora social que está a cargo de su niña, y empezamos a acompañar el proceso. Y durante 3 meses logramos de que la niña regresara por la edad. No quiso la familia que se quedara en Estados Unidos porque tenía una edad de 8 años. La niña, 9 meses detenido, logramos de que apoyar a la familia, de que se reunificara en Guatemala. Y la niña llega en Guatemala ya como que con todo ese miedo de que su papá le hizo un daño, porque el momento de que ella llega, es recibido por la familia, la niña no quiso en su momento abrazar, ver a su papá. Es más, se acercó a su mamá, a sus hermanitos, pero más no quiso ver a su papá. Entonces nosotros nos percatamos que ahí hay un daño emocional, hay un daño psicosocial, la niña está afectada. Entonces tuvimos que venir en la aldea, acompañarlos, ubicar las casas donde están viviendo, y de ahí, ¿qué son las consecuencias de esa separación en esta familia? La niña trajo en las noches, se levantaba en sus sueños, salía corriendo atrás de su casa, ¿sí? La niña, en cuanto a alimentación, ya no se adaptó tan así rápidamente en lo que la comida de su familia. La niña ya quería comer comida como le estaban dando en los centros de detención. Y es una familia indígena que comen los frijolitos y que comen lo que consiguen las comunidades, ¿verdad? Pero la niña se cambió su hábito de alimentación. Y la mamá, pues, asustada, y no saber qué hacer, qué va a pasar con la niña si se enferma, y si la niña, ¿quién lo va a apoyar, verdad? Pero como nosotros ya nos constituimos apoyándolo, hicimos todo el esfuerzo para que de a poco, pues, la familia restablecieran esta emoción, esta relación entre hijo que tenía el Señor con esta niña. Ese es un caso. En el otro caso, un niño ya pasado a los 12 años, un poquito grandecito. También esto quedó detenido. El papá tuvo un largo litigio de 1 año. 1 año estuvo separado, detenido en un centro de detención, el niño y el papá aquí en la comunidad. De igual manera, este señor no encontraba ningún apoyo hasta que supo del servicio que nosotros damos. Se acercó a nosotros y le empezamos a apoyar. El niño ya no regresó a Guatemala. El niño se quedó en los Estados Unidos porque se había adaptado a la vida de allá, y cuando le preguntaron si quería volver a venir en su aldea porque la casa en donde vivía sus padres, dijo que no, que mejor prefería él que vinieran sus padres en los Estados Unidos y que no él regresara, porque él decía de que tiene bien claro él de que su papá lo trajo a los Estados Unidos porque quieren una mejor vida para ellos. Si regresaba, decía, si regresaba a su comunidad, él decía que al final de cuentas él no va a gozar digamos, de ese futuro que en su momento se le ofreció. Este señor, cuando llegó a Guatemala, estuvo 5 días en la ciudad sin saber, sin tener ni un quetzal para movilizarse de un lugar a otro. ¿Sí? Hasta que empezamos a conocer en detalle sus casos, es cuando nos da a conocer que él, hasta incluso este señor padre, porque no salía a su niño, un momento quiso suicidar, es decir, se quiso matar él, porque él, aparte de que emocionalmente estaba triste porque su hijo no lograba su libertad, también daban a conocer de que también como tenían, en el día que prendieron el viaje, ellos tenían compromisos económicos con personas que les ayudó para movilizarse. Entonces, aparte de que habían perdido su niño, también tenían presiones de devolver el dinero prestado en su momento. Entonces, son estos daños que nosotros vamos, digamos, a documentar, a escuchar, a vivir de esas familias. Entonces, en esos casos, uno de la familia daba a conocer de que lo que no quería es volver. El padre no quería volver a los Estados Unidos porque él tenía susto de que si va a pasar otra vez en la misma ruta o lo van a pasar en donde estuvo de inicio. Entonces, es triste esta historia, pero gracias por todas las conexiones y los enlaces que se estaba haciendo. Este padre hasta último, después de varios años, el padre hasta este año 2022 logró viajar y encontrar a su niño en los Estados Unidos. Estuvo un año detenido en un centro de detención, le tuvieron que buscar una patrocinadora. Él ya vivía con eso hasta que este año su papá, que fue deportado, que estuvo detenido también, lograron viajar y encontrar con el niño. Entonces, esos son, digamos, lo que nosotros hacemos, pero para ubicar a estas familias es un recorrido de 2 a 3 días de encontrarlos, porque nadie tiene datos concretos, nadie tiene algún mapa que te digan, esta familia lo vas a ir a encontrar a tal lugar. Eso no lo tenemos, nosotros solo recibimos datos. Nosotros tenemos que buscar nuestra metodología para encaminar, encontrar y ubicar las familias. Las reunificaciones hoy día, pues con lo que hablaba Cathleen, el beneficio que se les está dando por este programa, en muchas de las familias se ha visto con buenos ojos. Creemos que lo ocurrido en los daños psicológicos, emocionales, han vivido los niños hoy día, pues eso, hay un niño que hace poco lo encontré con su papá, le preguntaba yo si ya todo está normal. El papá me dijo, no, de vez en cuando él tengo que llevarlo a un médico porque por rato se queda callado, no sé si empieza a hacer memoria de que un momento estuvo un espacio fuera de su aldea, fuera de su país, desconocido. Entonces, él dice que necesita tratamiento, ¿verdad? Entonces, la mayoría de los casos acompañados en estos procesos ubicados, reunificados, los daños se han visto mucho en los niños. Muchos niños han sido dañados psicológicamente, inclusive al momento de que son deportados meses después de ser detenidos en los centros de detención. Al volver en la escuela, los niños le hacen bullying, es decir, viene aquel que fue a trabajar o entre niños, ¿verdad? Sufren bullying. Nosotros hemos dado acompañamiento de niños que dejaron la escuela por un tiempo por intentar ir, pero después de que regresan, digamos, nuevamente tiene que sufrir varias cosas en el círculo de la escuela y nosotros hemos acompañado esos procesos. Eso, digamos, ha sido nuestro aporte y sigue siendo nuestro aporte en los círculos, en los casos que apoyamos durante el proceso que estamos con Justice in Motion.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Cathleen y Eriberto. Thank you so very much. So we do have ample time for questions, discussion. You can put your question in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and we'll try to make sure we get to everybody. If you are able to speak Spanish and you want to ask your question, in both English and Spanish, that would help. Otherwise, we are happy to translate. Marcela, go ahead.
Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias, Eriberto, y muchas gracias, Cathleen. Thank you very much for that, very informative presentation. Nos dieron mucha información. Yo me pregunto si en Guatemala tienen servicios psicológicos para las familias. ¿El Estado está de alguna manera acompañándolos a ustedes en esta, tanto en la búsqueda como en lo que sucede después?
En la búsqueda no. En la búsqueda nosotros nos organizamos, nosotros hacemos nuestro plan de búsqueda. Desde que estoy, desde el 2008, no he visto ninguna entidad, ni un personal de entidad pública que se haya ofrecido, porque saben, ahora ya saben de nosotros, ahora ya escuchan de nosotros, que nosotros estamos apoyando a estas familias, pero no hemos visto este apoyo. Por un lado, el tema de si hay entidades, algún lugar donde se puedan atender las familias psicológicamente. Hay entidades, pero las comunidades, las familias, para movilizarse, para llegar a este centro de atención, es decir, una familia que emigró, que está a 6 horas del pueblo, el tema de acceso a las carreteras, y segundo, las familias no va a venir a buscar a esta entidad porque primero va a necesitar recurso económico para movilizarse. Si están pasando las peores situaciones, han sido deportadas, no va a ser de que si hay alguna campaña, alguna entidad que se acerque a las comunidades para ofrecer este apoyo, no hay. Es lo mínimo que nosotros hemos podido hacer, hemos hecho. También parte de nuestro trabajo como defensor ha sido ser interlocutor con otras entidades. Hemos hecho peticiones, gestiones ante otras entidades de que vemos a las familias y les decimos, necesitamos que ustedes se acerquen a esta familia porque está haciendo, pero en muchos de los casos no han sido, digamos, apoyados.
And if I could just add a little bit to that, there's one organization in Huehuetenango called Pop Cán that has been providing psychological support for families that can access Huehue, and they collaborate with KIND, which is Kids in Need of Defense, who's part of the steering committee and deeply engaged in all this work. So Pop Cán has been part of this, but we, two points here is everything Eriberto says is true. We're doing a pilot project because not all the families are going to return. So families may choose not to return, or the US government is not going to allow them to return because something's in their record when they're being processed to return for humanitarian parole, they're not going to be allowed to return. So for the families that stay behind, we are doing a pilot project to figure out how to bring psychological support to them. And so Eriberto is part of that group. There's about 20 defenders that are thinking about it. They gathered in Antigua, Guatemala in July to think about, we put a little pot of money aside, just a little bit, to be like, what can we do for these families to help the families that stay behind get back on their feet? So I wanted to mention that. And also just the impact on the defenders themselves. Like, as Eriberto said, like they do serious work in Guatemala. Like a lot of these guys have worked on genocide cases, death threats, like frontline human rights lawyers themselves constantly under death threats. But this work with the separated families, it's had an impact that there's just something different about taking children away, and these guys seeing the families that are getting back together, the ones that they're seeing in Guatemala, that is at a level that's affecting people. So we've actually just started providing availability to therapists for the defenders who want it. Believe it or not, therapists in Chile, because we have some connections in Chile and some therapists down there. So we're starting our own kind of psychosocial support for the defenders who want to avail themselves of that, because the vicarious trauma has been, for very, very seasoned defenders, it's been tremendous. So I just want to add that piece.
Eriberto, con cuánta gente cuentan ustedes? Perdón. Sí.
En Guatemala ya más o menos como 15 a 20 defensores en distintas regiones del país. Como le digo, yo estoy en la región norte, en una parte de Guatemala, donde puedo ayudar a las familias porque son indígenas, son maya hablante quichí. Es un poquito, digamos, lo que se ha analizado, donde podemos generar confianza con las familias, porque también las familias, contarnos el testimonio, el relato que ellos hayan vivido, no ha sido fácil. Ser defensor, ayudar a estos casos en Guatemala tampoco ha sido fácil. Nosotros también corremos día a día de un lado a otro, pero saben que en Guatemala vivimos bajo varias estructuras, digamos, violentas. Entonces también eso, justamente también como me preguntaban el tema de que si nosotros contamos, pues incluso creo que los problemas que hemos visto digamos, de cada familia, nos los hemos tomado para nosotros, porque hasta nosotros nos sentimos afectados por esas vivencias y esas historias de las familias, y creo que ha sido justo, y gracias en conjunto con la red, pues Justice ahora pues nos está promoviendo de que nosotros también emocional y psicológicamente nos estemos preparando más, porque la verdad es demasiado, digamos, los casos diferentes, impactantes, niños que están regresando, niños que fueron detenidos, niños que pasaron años sin tener contacto con sus padres, pero que después lo hemos logrado ubicarlos y apoyar en ese sentido.
I wanted to ask a question. So, so Cathleen, you mentioned that you're working towards a more global solution to perhaps give some kind of a more permanent, solution for the families, and not just a temporary humanitarian visa. What do you think? How are you doing that work, and what do you think the chances are that there might be, political support or some kind of support for a more global solution? Estaba preguntando sobre algo que dijo Cathleen al final, de que están buscando una solución más global para las familias, y no solo para las familias que han conseguido abogados, sino como un grupo. ¿Cómo veía las posibilidades para los?
Yes. So what's happening now? So there's a limit to what President Biden can do for these families. So President Biden cannot grant them permanent immigration status, which, as you all probably know, that's why the DACA kids, it's that temporary that he doesn't have, as an executive branch, doesn't have access to that. So Congress is the one that can do that. And the Families Belong Together Act has no Republican support, and not even full Democratic support, and it's not moving. So that is a comprehensive bill that would provide permanent immigration status to the family and a lot of access to social services in the United States, right? So the ones that are in the United States, because the ones that are here now don't have, as you all may know, that refugees, when they come in, they're coming into a well-oiled system that could certainly be better, but there's a system where they receive benefits, they receive housing, et cetera. These families are going right into the regular asylum system, which is nothing. So they're not getting any kind of support for access from the government, paid by the government, access to housing, et cetera. So they're really on their own to figure this out. There's a lot of organizations trying to step up. And there's a lot of demand right now, actually, in Congress through appropriations to get money put into getting more services dedicated to these families. The global reference was the global settlement. So the civil rights cases bring monetary damages for the families that prevail. So really the best thing would be for families to have money to make their own decisions about what to do to get on their feet. And so last year, I think it was November, the Wall Street Journal, there was a leak because President Biden, the DOJ, was going to settle these cases. And he was going to settle it as a global settlement, meaning all 5,000 families would benefit, not just the ones who filed the lawsuit, which is 900 families. So 900 is a lot less than 5,000. So there was political will to do that. Let's just settle all these cases. Let's get these families some money ranging. There was gonna, be a lot of details to be worked out of how it would be figured out. But it got sensationalized, leaked in the Wall Street Journal, and it blew up. So now Department of Justice is vigorously fighting all of these families so they don't get any money. Whether after midterm elections that will change politically and there'll be another opportunity for a global settlement, or these families are all going to have to be fighting in court for any access to funds that could help them get back on their feet. So that was kind of the reference to it. I mean, the long-term solution is politicians who aren't going to do this. I mean, because it can happen again. It can happen tomorrow. It is the politicians who make the decision whether it's going to happen or not. I'm surprised there's not more questions out there. You all just so knowledgeable. You know all about this.
Ayla, go ahead.
Pues este no es completamente sobre el tema, en mi español no es perfecto. This is totally on theme, pero quiso consejos si hay mejor modo para hacer lo que hicimos sobre ese caso de un menor de edad de 14 años que fue en Florida, en Miami, con su papá. Su papá fue deportado. Aquí estaba el menor sin adulto y su papá vivía en, Liz va a saber dónde está eso, en Cabá, Chahul, Quiché. Sin recepción telefónica ni nada más, solamente fue para subir a una colina cada 2 semanas para intentar contacto. Él llamó a otro porque dijo a uno del equipo de salud de la CPR que vivía en un reasentamiento, mire, tenemos un número, pero solamente hay respuesta por máquina y todo está en inglés. Ella habla inglés. Hay que preguntarle a ella para buscar solución. Y yo llamé al número y dijo, van a recibir una respuesta la máquina en 24 horas. Hice eso por 3 días. Y pareció cuando empecé de chequear que fue de una entidad del estado de Florida, que tal vez no tuvo mucha experiencia con migrantes. Y ese pobre niño estaba, pues, menor de edad, fue pidiendo solamente para regresar a Guatemala. Y nada estaba ocurriendo. Por eso hablé con el consulado aquí en Tucson, porque pues, somos amigos. Ellos mandaron un mensaje yo pienso al consulado en Miami y he escuchado que ahorita sí la familia fue posible para la familia de salir para firmar papeles y hay emoción, pero estoy pensando tal vez ustedes con más experiencia saben mejor modo. Y estoy un poco preocupado por el jovencito. Él pasó solamente 2 años en los Estados Unidos, casi no hay nada para menores de edad, pues adolescentes en Cabá. Y no sé, pero tenemos un poco, estamos avanzando. según el deseo del menor y de su papá y mamá y su abuelo. Conocemos bien su abuelo, pero pues, hay mejor modo para tratar de un caso como esto. Esta es mi pregunta. And if anyone wants, I can run that through in English, which is a lot better than my Spanish, but did everybody sort of get it? Because this has taken a lot of time. If there are other questions.
Yeah, what I was just going to answer quickly is that you should connect that young man to legal representation in Miami, right, to help him with his options. So we can, do you want to connect offline and just, that's probably the best step so they can figure out how to get that child some help in Miami.
Okay, I think it is being handled now because the family had to leave and go, I think, to Huehue to fill out papers. So it sounds like between the two consulates, probably putting on pressure, there may be some movement. But if we can, if Liz or
we'll give you their contact.
Connect us, then if there's any problem at all, we'll know who to go to.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Aminta, yes. Aminta, do you want to ask your question? Yes, we'll connect you. Ayla.
Sure. Primero que nada, muchas gracias por la presentación. Obviamente es un tema fuerte y de mucho interés para todos. Pero una de las cosas que mencionaron hoy es que han habido muchas demandas legales en contra de parte de las familias afectadas en contra del gobierno estadounidense. Pero hasta donde yo sé, varias de estos centros de detención en los Estados Unidos son operados por compañías privadas de prisión. Entonces, obviamente que estas compañías lo que quieren es hacer dinero. Y personalmente yo he leído mucho acerca de las condiciones malas en esos centros de detención. Entonces, quería saber si hay demandas en contra de estas compañías ahorita o si están pensando en entablar demandas en el futuro. Solo tengo curiosidad de eso. Gracias.
Sure. Yeah. So within the zero tolerance context, there are some lawsuits out there. I know like Southern Poverty Law Center has several, and Texas Civil Rights Project has several, and then lots of big law firms have different ones for how children were treated. There were some, accusations of, in the worst cases, sexual harassment or abuse of kids, to just, forced injections within the zero tolerance. Outside of that, there are some forced labor cases moving forward. These have been going on for a while. I mean, these started under Obama, which feels like a very long time ago. And what that is about is that in immigration detention, immigrants are working and getting $1 a day, but in the Constitution, it talks about criminal detention and that kind of payment. And this is administrative detention. So there's some interesting constitutional questions about whether you can force in a civil detention context, like is that a minimum wage or forced labor violation? So those are going on as well. There's tons of different conditions. Cases out there, and there's one about sleep deprivation they would leave the lights on, this was also under Obama ages ago. And these cases take so long to move forward, where they were leaving on the lights so that they would give up. It was a family detention center, so that the families would just give up their claims and go home. It's kind of that psychological torture of not being able to sleep, woken up all the time. I was like, I just don't even want my asylum case, just get me out of here, give up the claim and voluntary departure to go. So there's a variety of cases, kind of always, right? Not even, Trump just went on steroids with the severity of it, but there has been immigration detention conditions cases, and mostly in the private prisons, from what I understand, for a long time.
Thank you.
There is a question online or a comment, and I think Lori also has a question. Let me start with, it's John Kirk. He's saying, Cathleen, thank you very much for what you and your organization are doing. I would like to email you and make you aware of what I am documenting on the US-Mexico border. There are QAnon groups that are intercepting children and gathering information. personal details, etc., before calling Border Patrol to turn them in. Would it be possible to get your email address? So this is John Kirk. So if you can put your email address, Kathleen, on the chat, and Isla could also get a hold of it. Is that, if that's okay, or we can contact them directly
Sure.
for you.
I'll just put it in here.
You want to do?
I mean, we don't do any, just to be clear, we don't do any direct representation. So we are never filing lawsuits ourselves. Like Justice in Motion is supporting the US organizations that have country of origin issues in their lawsuits. So we're never filing. So we would just be kind of connecting you to whoever's filing that lawsuit, if someone already is. I don't know what people are doing about the QAnon. I saw some media about that. Sure, but I'll put my email in there.
Lori, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. First, quiero agradecer a los dos de ustedes y las organizaciones por este trabajo tan honrado y que se dedique tanto esfuerzo por tantos años. Muchas gracias. My question is whether the consulates, the Guatemalan consulates in the United States, are reference points for accessing services such as, especially what Eriberto has been describing. Can an individual, if someone calls me, can I tell them to call the consulate in order to find that resource in Guatemala, or where would a family start? Where would they start?
Good question. I think there's Together and Free is a great organization that started because of family separation to try to figure out the patchwork services in the United States for families to find support. And that's not legal services, it's more like the social services, the families that are staying here. So they're a great point. The consulates can be good if there's motivated staff. So we don't do so much on the USA side. So I'm not quite sure how helpful certain consulates are being or not. I don't know. Eriberto, no sé si tienes comentarios sobre los consulados de Guatemala acá. La reputación de ayudar a la gente o no sabes.
No escuché. ¿Qué es?
Si puedes comentar sobre el papel de los consulados aquí en Estados Unidos para ayudar a las familias, si ellos están haciendo algo o no sé, ¿cuál es tu opinión?
En cuanto a reunificación, no he tenido alguna nota al respecto, pero en cuanto a familias que hayan, por ejemplo, un migrante que haya fallecido allá en Estados Unidos, sí, específicamente he escuchado de que en algunos se ponen en acción luego para poder ayudar a la repatriación del cuerpo de la familia, porque también hay algunos que acompañamos en esos procesos. En eso hemos tenido experiencia que el consulado se acciona de manera inmediata para ayudar a algunas familias que sufren de esos accidentes. Pero en cuanto a reunificación, no he tenido nota al respecto que algún padre o alguna familia haya sido apoyado por parte del consulado para que se haga la reunificación. No he tenido nota al respecto.
But I think it would be good for families who are in the United States to call the local consulates to ask, because I think it's good for the consulates to hear Guatemalans asking for help. If they're not already tapped into the local organizations that are helping families, they should be, and they might be. We just don't have any direct knowledge.
I wanted to ask one more question, unless there's anyone else who wants to ask. And I wanted to circle back, Kathleen, to what you were talking about, that Justice in Motion has also worked around getting justice within temporary visa programs for guest workers. And you mentioned a bit that the Biden administration is trying to put more attention on expanding that. So I guess I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? Well, first of all, how do you work to address questions of injustice within those temporary visa programs? And what are your thoughts about possibly building a temporary work program that is less unjust?
Mhm. Yes, great question. So definitely President Biden is talking about building up regular pathways to migration. So I just first want to say that not necessarily, so the temporary foreign worker visa programs have been around since 1986, and there's very little oversight of the programs. So exploitation is pretty common, and even up to human trafficking. So we've worked on cases for people getting T visas, trafficking visas, victims of human trafficking who came on temporary foreign worker visas. So the program as is, it really relies on a benevolent employer. So if the employer has good intentions and will police themselves, then it can work well for the people who come up. But we've worked on way too many cases of human trafficking. So what is important is it's interesting because Biden's looking at it as job creation program as a way to stem irregular migration. The numbers that we're talking about, I mean, last year there was less than 5,000 workers that came, or pre-COVID, less than 5,000 workers that came from Guatemala. And there's a lot more than 5,000 people who migrate from Guatemala. So a temporary job in the United States is not, the supply and demand, there's just no way that it would ever get there. And the temporary programs, I mean, the intent of them are if no US workers are available. So it also has to be designed to be fair to US workers so that it's not just, let's just go through the motions. Like one of my favorite examples is, even Mar-a-Lago for former President Trump, they're in the H2 program. And they actively didn't want US workers. So those US workers had to apply for jobs at the hotel by fax. Who applies by fax anymore to a job? So it's like certain employers get into it because they don't want US workers. They're looking for a more vulnerable workforce. And your name is on your visa, the worker has the employer's name on their visa. They're not allowed to work for anyone else. So they are kind of captive workforce. And we've heard employers say they get into the programs to have a captive workforce because free workers can move, right? If jobs aren't, well, even undocumented workers in a different way can move between jobs, whereas H2 workers are very much trapped. So it's it's tough because since they're workers that aren't in the United States, they're very much kind of voiceless because they're not living here. They don't have political influence because they're not citizens while working here. So they're US workers in one sense, but they're from a foreign country and they go back. So, the unions now in the United States are, looking to organize those workers, but at first they weren't because they were like, well, they're not from here. They don't belong here. And then in the countries of origin, they're never there to have proper representation either. So it's globally very popular, temporary foreign worker visas as a substitute to permanent immigration. So I think that's the caution that people should also consider when they're looking at this, because Congress is not looking at the PERM program, the permanent program for people to come up and stay, have a green card and choose to stay if they want to. Temporary visas are very popular because you can just cut them off and it's very easy to retaliate against workers and for them never to be able to come up again, get blacklisted or on the denied list. So I think there's a lot of complications around it. So just a lot of caution, and we are working to improve the programs because there's opportunities right now. USAID is pouring lots of money into Northern and Central America, into the governments down there as well, to build up their recruitment processes to get more workers to come up again as an alternative. So we are, working with the governments in country of origin and the US government to make it better. I mean, if they're going to do something, at least have more protections, at least have workers more educated about their rights. And the countries of origin governments have a lot to do to protect workers in that process as well, because they have their own laws when foreign countries recruit on their territory. But I'll just stop there because I could talk a long time about temporary foreign worker visas because we started on that. So the immigration world is a little bit newer to us. Like the labor world is where we came into this work.
There is a question in the chat about the temp workers, about accessibility. I presume in the recruitment process to campesinos who don't have internet or even regular cell phone service. Whether there's work being done to make the information more available to people who don't have those regular means of finding out.
That's right. That's right. And it's a good point, you know, about undocumented workers coming up, because if you're talking about getting on an airplane or, you know, dying in the desert, clearly getting on an airplane to come to the United States is a better option and a more dignified. It's just neither option is a great option, right? Of course, we want people to have the choice to migrate, not for force, right? So of course, that's the first thing, is having dignified life in your home country, so you don't have to resort to these both hard choices. Access, if someone wants to go on a program, the Guatemalan government is now, you know, recruiting workers to go up there. It's mostly private recruitment. So what happens is usually an employer in Arizona has someone from Guatemala working for them and says, why don't you bring up family members and bring up your community? And that's how many of these recruiters start. So there's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 recruiters in Guatemala and a few less in other countries, and tons in Mexico. And Mexico dominates these H2 programs because it's cheaper to pay for transportation for Mexican workers than it is to pay for an airplane for workers from Central America. So there's a lot of fraud. So what happens, so it's hard to, I don't have a name of an ethical recruiter that I can give you that I can tell you to sign up right now, because there's a lot on social media, especially sometimes there's a lot of fraud. So people give money and it's just criminal operators stealing money. So we're trying to help improve that, get transparency in recruitment so people can know who are registered recruiters. Guatemala just passed a registration law this year that's been in the works for, you know, it's in the labor code from 1960, and just this year they passed implementing regulations with no teeth or oversight, but it says they should recruit, and they're developing a system. So there would be a list. So it's hopefully getting safer. It's hopefully getting safer. And the next couple of years, we'll see much more opportunity and as a safer option for migration. And I'm going to give you an interesting website here that colleagues of ours in Mexico do, called Contratados. And it's like it's a website, like a Facebook for comments on recruiters. They're not covering Central America yet, but just to give you a flavor of how this works, you can take a peek. I'll put it in the chat.
Well, thank you so much. We don't see any other hands raised, and we are just about out of time. Quiero agradecer nuevamente a Eriberto Pop Cán y Cathleen Caron por estar con nosotros. I want to thank our speakers again. Y sobre todo que podemos iniciar esa conversación entre defensores de Centroamérica y gente que hace trabajo humanitario aquí en la frontera, so that we can have this conversation between the rights defenders in Central America and people here who are doing the humanitarian work on the border, que es un trabajo de mucha carga emocional, eso lo sabemos. Entonces realmente mis respetos, Eriberto, por todo lo que usted está haciendo, y también Cathleen. So again, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody. And yo espero que a partir de ahora pues podemos mantener la comunicación entre Justicia en Moción y los grupos que están acá en Arizona. So I hope this is just a first step, and that we can keep the communication going with this network that we've been hearing about, and also the work that's going on here. And so thank you all very much for participating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a los dos. I just want to let everybody know that our next Charla con Café is going to be in person. It's actually going to be hybrid. We have Ana Maria Ollarse from Chile. She's a medical anthropologist, and she's going to be talking about health, territory, and interculturality. Interculturalidad, anyway. It's her work with the Mapuche community in Chile. It's going to be in Spanish, but there is going to be interpretation. So it's going to be, the entire thing is going to be in Spanish. Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you.